possible, just because there was a lot of food for thought for me, who is a Hungarian politician, and my everyday job is to stand up against this system, which is the system of regime of Viktor Orban, and any forum like this is an important inspirational source for me. So I did this summary also for myself, and obviously I'm happy to share this with you. So the program was pretty well organized, so I more or less followed the structure. I organized my summary around a couple of questions, such as how do we call or conceptualize this something that we are talking about, and whether we think it's a threat for European liberal democracy. Why is the European Union is so incompetent in struggling or coping with the problem, the challenges? How this illiberal populist state is manipulating the media specifically, which is an important basis for liberal democracy, in addition to political freedom. And then I will try to say a couple of more details of the more operative ideas that you have with us today. The institutional tools of the potential institutional tools of the EU, and the political tools that we have or we may not have or we have to develop. So just very shortly, because I think there was a more or less general consensus that the illiberal democracy, as Orban Viktor called, or the authoritarian regime that characterizes Hungary and Greece, mainly in the current EU, or the populist state, whatever we call it, is a threat. It is by nature, by goal, is to undermine the European democratic values. They question the basic consensus of liberal democracy, which they don't even hide. They are manipulative and hypocrite, and do not solve any of the big troubles of these nations, of these societies. This probably was not said so clearly today, but I just would like to share that they can't solve anything. They just can take the power, but they actually cannot manage or solve any of the big social problems that the early 21st century European state are facing. So therefore they are very dangerous and threat to the liberal values, and I'm very happy that Rui Tavares said that the failure of the EU, of Europe to cope with these problems in Hungary and in Greece and probably some other countries is a common responsibility. So why the European Union is so incompetent? I just name a few things that were listed today. First of all, there was something about general decline or crisis of the European promise. I don't go into more details because it's a big chapter, but there is something which doesn't work as it was working like 30, 40 years ago. It is difficult to cope with them because they have democratic legitimacy. All populistic autocratic regimes that we've analyzed today were actually elected by democratic elections. It's difficult because they change the usual political behavior. They are fearless and unscrupulous, and question basic rules and basic norms and basic values. And this is actually, I think Europe is still in a situation of a surprise situation. So because they are reckless. They quit the political consensus, and the institutions are simply not prepared. Not the political nor the legal institutions are prepared to cope with this autocrats. for semi-autocrats. They, as you mentioned, many of you, they run their activities in a very systematic way. They are well developed. It seems that there is a vision behind, but may not be a vision, but definitely some kind of system, like the Franken-state. And of course, we face the lack of political will to cope or to really face all the problems. There was a lot talking about the media, how the populist state manipulate, what are the new tactics of the manipulation of the 21st century, in addition to the usual manipulations that have long history in the 20th century Europe, how they set up authoritarian narratives on moral basis, how they monopolize the state media, how they troll the social media, how they eat up the advertising market or divert, distort the advertising market by state money, what the discriminative character of the media and what kind of future more problematic things like cyber terrorism is facing us. Then I would probably say a couple of more on what there were some very interesting thought of how the European Union institutional competencies can be developed, what kind of tools can be, first of all, used and developed in the future. You mentioned that it's very important to identify the systemic threat the populist state represents to the European institution system, and that of course any development in institutions, there is a need for political will and there's some kind of collective approach of member states. You mentioned a more political process like the Copenhagen Commission idea, which would deal with development of democratic structures in political institutions, since those cannot guarantee everything, and also to take out of the discourse and the monitoring process of the mediatized political arena. You mentioned that the systematic nature of the infringement actions is important to identify and name, and then also when we are seeking for tools to cope with them, it is an important element to fix. There were many words on how the sanctions can be strengthened through the EU funds, through more scrutiny and compliance to EU laws, to introduce membership conditionality in addition to applicants, to represent a holistic approach, ex ante and ex post propositions, make every effort to monitor and sanction, to make a bigger emphasis of the Court of Justice, which is not in the political arena, and of course, in general, have a more creative approach and do what nobody has tried yet. So have kind of out-of-the-box thinking in general, both through the institutions, also trying the existing methods, and also funding and developing new tools. This is very true for the political part, which is probably, well, even more complicated than the institutional, or one is precondition for the other and vice versa. Well, without certain ranking, just dropping the ideas that came out to me today. First of all, describe and analyze and understand what's going on. I think that today was an important contribution to these elements, to understand better and deeper what's going on, in order that we are able to find more tools on various levels to cope with the challenges. To identify the threat, and also there's a job on all of us to make it clear and get a consensus about that this is a threat, because this doesn't seem to be obvious. Because that is necessary to make action and also to reform. There were several talk, and I think it's something very important to reframe the political narrative. These autocratic regimes make the reframing very well. They are very successful in framing, so we also have to be more creative in reframing and not just following what their agenda is. We know it very well in Hungary. Everyone is always following what Orbán Viktor is saying. It's practically, it's a following nation today. There is no one who was able to reframe anything. So it's a very important and of course obviously not very complicated task, but this is something must be done. And there was a talk about how political parties should reform itself to reframe also the narrative, to develop new political action, how to engage people, specifically the young people. And I think, again, a kind of more creative and out-of-the-box action of the political actors is something very important that was mentioned specifically in the last session. You talked a lot about the media, providing quality media, support the free media, to report on the situation, on the countries which are in trouble, overcome partisan media. So there's a lot to do on the media field. There is something about reconstructing the European promise, I think, a kind of general political goal which we all have to, maybe this also is a reframing today, but it may be something more about understanding, again, in the 21st century, the values that we believe Europe represent. So kind of reconstructing the European promise of originally prosperity, democracy, fundamental values. What do these things mean today? And of course, stand up, organize, be active, activate the society in general, and of course something which is, that there were many things which were said last time a couple of weeks ago in Budapest, and there were a lot of things which were not. And I think probably when the organizers, István and the staff, will put together the final document, this will come together in a very nice format. But one issue was obviously the same as a kind of general outcome, that there is a need for unification of democratic forces, and of course these democratic forces is very wide and therefore it's very complicated, but a kind of strategic partnership between democratic politicians from the left and the right and the center, and the media, journalists and civil society is something which is probably something we have to do. And I think while this is an initiative, obviously, for this approach, this general approach, and this can be done if we identify the problem in the same words, in the same manner, in the same format, and we find those partners who really want the same for the future of Europe. And I just finished with the word of Jean-Paul that well, Hungary is a very intimidated society in these days. So when I can easily say stand up and act and do things, but I can tell you that it's very difficult. People just don't want. They are frightened. They don't know what to do. They look around. They feel pretty lonely in many ways. And so I think the common efforts are very important, and also sharing some of the responsibility, because this is very inspirational for me personally too, and also obviously I think for many Hungarians who believe that they have to do something in this case. So thank you very much, and thank you for the entire day.
Thank you, Zsuzsa, and my role is simply to say thank you to all of you for coming and participating and making introductory remarks and comments and so on. It was a very fruitful day, I hope, for all of us. And you know, it was a second event, as Zsuzsa